Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again for Tuesday at the MSP Initiative. We have Billy Austin from Rocket Cyber on the line, and we're going to catch up with Billy just like we've done here with MSP Initiative, just kind of get an idea of how things have been since coronavirus has come to light, and we'll get into the good stuff. So, Billy, thanks for joining today. Where are you based out of?
I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, the center of God's country.
Got it. Texas is a great place.
Yeah.
Is that you've primarily based there? Always been based out of Dallas?
Yeah, we started Rocket Cyber about 3.5 years ago, headquartered in Dallas. All of our employees are here in the Dallas vicinity.
Cool. So, like, Texas has been one of those states that's been really open, like fast to come back, right? How are things, regionally? How are you feeling about things? Are people out and about? Or are they still kind of cooped up? Just curious.
Me personally, it's, I'm pretty hesitant to go out. I did start my gym exercises after gaining 18 pounds throughout the COVID environment. So in the process of dropping, and things are literally opening up like nothing's ever happened. People aren't wearing masks. There's no protection. Go in the superstore, the supermarket, and there's not one person wearing a mask in the whole store, but the operators who are standing behind glass. And actually I think our cleaners opened up on Monday. We've seen the dentist office and chiropractors open up. Literally it's like pre-COVID.
Wow, that's quick. You ready to go see movies again?
I have not checked the movie theaters, but I'm not sure if they're actually open or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. I see everything else open.
Awesome. So, a couple of questions just around that topic. If you had to get on a plane today, would you?
Well, I was on a plane yesterday.
Oh.
So, yes. I've been on 2 planes during COVID. Both of them were 747s on American Airlines. The first flight was in April. There was 3 people on that flight. Yesterday's flight, there were 7 of us. And I don't know exactly how many seats, but I think it's around 280 seats on a 747, somewhere around there. And so definitely vacated. A lot of room and space, plenty room for social distancing on the planes these days, that's for sure.
So what would be your tips if somebody is hesitant about going to an airport or getting on a plane?
Yeah, for me, so it's actually a requirement yesterday when I boarded American Airlines that you have to wear a mask. For me personally, I bring the alcohol stuff to rub on your hands. They're not really serving all the condiments and all that kind of stuff. As soon as you board the plane, they give you a bag and they're holding they've got their mask and their plastic gloves, so pretty protective. First thing I do is I turn off the air vents. As being a very frequent traveler, that's probably one of the number one contagious ways to get the actual flu. So for me personally, I turn off all those every time I board a flight. So my advice.
Okay. So you said you've been on a couple of flights. Have you gone anywhere interesting?
Cancun to Dallas, both trips.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's about a 2-hour and 20-minute flight. Airport in Cancun's pretty much shut down. Beaches are still shut down. And everything's pretty locked down there where you can't even do anything as of today.
Interesting. Well, that's good. I'm glad you've gotten some good R&R time in there because a lot of people seem like they're, kind of cooped up a little bit.
Yeah, true.
Awesome. So let's get into today's topic, right? Which is, or at least the first part of today's topic, which is don't become tomorrow's headline. I mean, we have, me, you, everyone has seen MSPs being dragged into the news headlines along with, all the other stuff that's happening just because they're in the middle of it. We were on with Dave Sobel a few sessions ago, and he said he had brought on the Louisiana Secretary of State, who was saying that, people are not necessarily presenting themselves properly. And if the industry doesn't police itself, that they're going to start policing it, which I don't think anybody. So
Yeah.
let's get an idea from your perspective, right? I mean, I don't have to go very far back in time to see headlines, with ransomware and networks being shut down. I think I just saw one a day and a half ago where somewhere in Tennessee, the entire local government shut half their network down, and because of an issue. I think yesterday there was a cell phone issue, right, with like T-Mobile and a bunch of the other providers, like all of a sudden all went down at once. So like from an MSP perspective, where are you seeing people falling down? What's the major challenge there, why we keep on getting dragged back into that conversation?
Yeah. So I'm going to back up for a second, just in the MSP space in and of itself, for those that come from ex-DOD or intelligence community, we use this verbiage or this acronym called defense in depth. That'll be transitioned to what we call, in the MSP, the verbiage is a little bit modified. We use the phrases security stack, layered security. All three of those are very closely coupled. And, I would say over the past 18 to 24 months, people have been, MSPs have had a mad rush to go out and figure out and solidify what that security stack's going to be. With that said, there's always change. One great antivirus vendor last year might be a bad vendor this year for whatever reason, whether it's pricing, bad detections, whatever it may be. But there's always going to be change based on that stack, and people have to understand and be able to adopt to that change, which includes.
So that's really difficult. Let me key in on that for a second.
Yeah.
So, from an MSP perspective, when they engage a vendor, right? I mean, everyone wants the multi-year agreement. Everybody wants like a commitment financially in terms of minimum stuff like that. Like, if you're telling me, like, how frequently then should these people be reevaluating these layers of security?
Yeah, it's, I didn't really want to get too granular down this path. I was really trying to emphasize that solidifying the stack. So let's go back 2 years ago.
Yep.
And even recently, we still see it today. Many MSPs came from the break fix world, let's face it, right? They migrated into traditional recurring revenue, IT traditional services, if you will. And kind of the next evolution is, how do you migrate from an MSP to becoming an MSSP? And most MSPs are very familiar with what we call static-based audits. And it's transitioning from that audit world to what we call continuous monitoring. So inside that continuous monitoring is different technology, processes, and people that have to be incorporated. And this is such a great time to be having people knock on my door from it's Amazon and UPS. Can you give me 2 seconds?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Hold on 1 second.
Candid, ladies and gents, not pre-recorded, I promise.
Yeah, hold on 1 second.
I wonder if it's a primnesia. I wonder if he knows what he has.
Okay, back in the saddle, but
Was it an Amazon delivery? Did you remember what you got?
As a remote control, but people kind of adopt to the dogs barking, the dishwasher's going, and the doorbell going off during these the new work from home strategy. So
Sure,
hey, you too, I'd be a little bit more embarrassed, but I think it's kind of the norm right now. One second, I answer that door.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, so getting back to the security stack, historically, what I was trying to allude to is, you had the two primary stuff. We had the AV, we had firewalls. Now you're starting to see the adoption of SOC-as-a-Service and all the different components that go in that, which includes like, log monitoring, firewall monitoring, Office 365 monitoring, and there's just lots of things to fill in the buckets throughout that.
I think the concern is that, like, do all these tools don't all talk to each other, right? I think that's the major challenge.
Well, that's one of the challenges. So is interoperability and integrations. There's multiple problems. That's number one. Number two is the actual skill sets and the talent. Who's going to manage and operate and administrate this stuff? From a MSP that might have, a handful of guys that are really well talented in networking and technology, and maybe they have a little bit of security acumen. The problem is in order to efficiently monitor the security of our customers, we need constant eyes and constant monitoring. It's almost like the ADT of the housing market, right? If the bad guy's about to break into the house, you need to be able to sound that bell really quick.
So no, it makes total sense. So like, let me ask you this question. So I think there's a problem generally with MSPs with alert fatigue, right? There's a lot of tools, a lot of them are islanded, some are connected. They're all creating emails, they're all creating tickets. I mean, logs from all of these security points, I mean, we could have 100,000 logs in a day, depending on how many endpoints, right? Or how many customers. So like, how do you make any sense of that? Because right now that the scary part of that is, like, hey, everybody wants to make sure that they're not the next, problem child in the news, but it's not easy, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to worry about.
Yeah. It's, you're a very good announcer, interviewer, whatever you want to call it, because that's probably a very hot topic, not just in the MSP space, but throughout the enterprise and mid-markets. The problem is, you got $5 million, you can go out and buy the best products in the enterprise space and put them in. But if you don't have the aptitude or understand how to deal with the events and the detections and how to take it to the next stage, which is it an actual incident that I need to apply a remedy for? And the short answer is, you have to be able to have a dedicated security team in order to monitor. And thus, there's an acronym that we use throughout the industry called triaging. And that is the process of investigating all these hundreds of thousands of events to determine, is that actually a malicious actor or not? Is that a malicious incident? And if it is, so you've got two different things here. You've got thousands of events, and then you've got a small finite number of triaged events, which become incidents. Given that most MSPs focused on the small, medium business, they would prefer to have that security team really focusing on triaging all those events, where they just really focus on the smaller number, which are going to be concerning, actionable incidents. Therefore, you've been seeing what we call a boom in the industry over these past 12 months, probably more so than ever, and we still haven't reached the peak, is you're going to hear three different phrases. One called the managed SOC. I even hear people calling it SOC in a box. And then you have a third one called SOC-as-a-Service, which tends to be probably the most favorite acronym or popular throughout the MSP community.
What's the third one? She said SOC in a box, SOC-as-a-Service. What's the third one?
And then you hear what's commonly used in the enterprise space, which is called a managed SOC.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So what are the security, like you said, hey, security team, right? Like, what does that mean? What are the competencies, that the people on a SOC team or a security team would actually have?
Yeah. So the skill sets on behind the scenes of a SOC. So first of all, if you go back to the attack vehicles, when we look at the entry point, how does somebody get into the network? They're going to get in, and I'm going to coin phrase this more towards the small business. So what do they have in common? They've all got an edge router, which is Ubiquiti or Fortinet or whatever it may be, right? What else do they have in common? They've got Office 365. Yes. And then obviously we have the endpoint, which are very heavily populated, with Windows 10 throughout the most part. So given those three, what we call attack vectors from a high level cloud network and endpoint, you have to be able to understand firewall logs, syslog data, which basically means that you need to understand TCP and UDP protocols, understand, things like who is and lookups. Can you be able to pick out and identify when somebody's trying to authenticate to a firewall via SSH? And did they get in, or was it simply failed attempts? And is it coming from the same destination, and are they trying to repeatedly get in? And it's only a matter of time if we're not monitoring those specific types of activities.
So,
go ahead.
so are you talking about logging at one of the 3 points that you mentioned, or are we actually filtering traffic in real time and trying to pick it out of the network stream?
Yeah, it's a combination, but specifically what I'm referring to right now is actually the logs from the edge device in and of itself to give us that network telemetry. And let me pick on something a little bit easier, not knowing everybody that's part of the audience, but let's pick on Office 365 for a moment. If I'm in Dallas, Texas, and I see failed login attempts to my Office 365 account in Russia, that happens once a day. Yeah, great. Somebody's trying to brute force their way in, on a periodic time frame. I'm probably going to let that slide maybe. But if I see the same offender or the same actor trying to authenticate repeatedly over and over, I probably want to create some remedy for that, which today there's a couple things. We could obviously throw in multi-factor authentication, even though that's not 100% bulletproof as we see that circumvented.
Well, hold on 1 second before you go on.
Yeah.
So multi-factor is like, people are talking about it like it's the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
What is the Achilles heel then in multi-factor? If people are getting past it, how are they doing that?
Yeah, I'll make one comment. It doesn't matter what prevention you stick in place. It's only a matter of time before it gets circumvented or evaded. It's simply another stack in the layer in order to evade criminals from getting into the fortress.
Okay, fair enough. So you definitely do it, but it's not the only thing that's going to save you.
Yeah, in fact, last week, or it was last week, that there was a well-documented attack that circumvented multi-factor authentication, getting into email compromises. I can tell you today we're uncovering probably 3 Office 365 email compromises a day, where pre-COVID it was probably once every 2 days. So we've actually seen the Microsoft 365 becoming more and more of a target. We can only make assumptions why.
Is it just Microsoft? Is Google, or there's
well, right now at the given moment with our personal SOC, we support Office 365 security monitoring, not the Google suite. I anticipate that Google's probably having the same challenges, but we have to prioritize on what we support internally at our SOC. The other thing is what happens when I log in from Dallas, but you've got a guy in Russia that's doing these brute force attempts, but now you see somebody in China that's actually authenticated and successfully logged in. How can you be logged into 2 different geolocations? So technologically, yes, you could be, but it's very highly unlikely.
Is there, just throw you a curveball here. Is there any truth to the idea that these bad guys are using domestic servers to get past the geolocation?
Yeah, absolutely. We see it every day. So it's, there's what I call the cherry pickings, which, historically we've referred to those guys like script kiddies that are just going to go and fire up. They've got their own attack lab and they've got their own Amazon servers and whatever hosting provider. And they're going to use those to connect and launch attacks. So, as soon as we create a block, they're going to switch to a different subnet. Now we're starting to see where when we create what's called conditional access rules in Azure, they're now going to go start creating their server farms up in the US or Texas or Canada or wherever it may be.
Or even in Azure too, right? They can just fire up a server there.
Yeah, but what it's doing is how many people we monitor that don't have MFA, don't have any conditional access. It's a lot. It's a big volume. So when you look at that security stack again, it's all about, look, here's a remedy that you can put in place that's going to deter a good percentage of attack activity. It's not going to make you 100% secure, but it's going to deter and make you a less likely candidate to becoming that next victim, if you will.
Okay, so let me just recap, just to make sure we heard this right. MFA, additional access, obviously monitoring, that's part of the big discussion here.
Yeah.
What else are we missing from the obvious things that people are not doing?
Yeah. the number one thing that I see right now amongst most customers where they lack, but they want to do it, is what we call log monitoring. And log monitoring is, so you get the quick wins on the endpoint and on the network. And then when people are logging their firewalls, they have nobody reviewing that data. When you do have logs turned on the Microsoft Office, nobody's reviewing that data. And think about that for a second. There's 31 million North American small business, from the latest US small business post. And the majority, it's very heavily populated. It's almost a monopoly with a Microsoft 365. It's a big blind spot from a security perspective, because who's monitoring all that login activity? Who's logging and looking for any unauthorized mail forwarding rules?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two popular things that we see when somebody gets into Microsoft Office. Either A, they're going to create forwarding rules to be able to siphon out intelligent data from that victim, which is typically the president or somebody of utmost importance at that corporation. Or two, is they're going to perform what's called internal spear phishing. So now that I'm actually authenticated as that user, I can send a malicious PDF or spreadsheet to an internal candidate, which they're going to be it's a very high probability that customer is now going to open that file. And given the plethora of automated black market attack code that's out there that circumvents traditional AV, they can be able to create scripts or what we call multi-stage attacks to be able to embed into that document where it's actually not going to be flagged by the AV vendor, but it allows them to create a persistence, create persistence and a presence on that endpoint. Now that they have presence on the endpoint, they can start pivoting and gaining access to other endpoints on the network. That's how all this stuff starts.
That's very intriguing. So is the challenge that a lot of the security things that are supposed to be there by default don't kick in because the message is coming from an internal user?
That's right. Yeah, it's coming from an internal user. And, let's be real for a second. Who's monitoring their Office 365 security?
Yeah.
And
no, I mean, there's a lot to it, right? I mean, I know Microsoft's come out with like their security score thing.
Yeah.
But that only once you get there, it's like a point in time, right? It can't but unfortunately security is an ongoing thing.
Yeah. And we also have obstacles with certain security enforcement. So, let's just pick on MFA for an example. Anybody that has ever tried to pitch that to a small business, regardless whether you made it free or charged for it, there's a rebuttal. And because it's an extra step the actual employee or user has to go through, it's like, oh, now I got to insert another step just for me to get access to something. And there's a lot of people that don't like to go through that. But when you present on a silver platter that says it's either this, or you see these guys in China that's actually trying to compromise your account, and by the way, you see the guy in Russia who's actually in your account right now, they tend to take that evidence and implement security controls a little bit more seriously.
It's a shame that in the SMB space and small medium enterprise, whatever you want to call it, that it usually takes pain before they spend money on this category for some reason.
Yeah, no,
I think the crutch, in my opinion, is the cyber liability insurance add-on to their business policy that they think is going to cover them, right?
Yeah, I've actually, ironically, about a month and a half ago, I analyzed some of these policies that are included from vendors and even from insurance providers. And when you look underneath the scenes, I see these $1 million policies that are being promoted. And you look at the actual raw details, it says we will cover $25,000 per infected machine, but we only provide $1,600 for any type of remediation and cleanup related to that infected ransomware, which most of the cost, when you think about it, is the service work of repairing the machine that was infected, the whole backups and all that. So you have to be careful with what liability insurance that you're actually selecting. you could probably do 2 or 3 different webcasts just on cyber liability insurance in and of itself. That's just my quick bullet point on that.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting business. I feel like after 9/11, terrorism insurance, what riders were popular. And then obviously, when Sandy hit here on the East Coast and they haven't seen a hurricane for 100 years, all of a sudden people were getting flood insurance and stuff like that. So I feel like about 4 or 5 years ago, every insurance agent in America was recommended by their upstream carrier to do this cyber liability thing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the stuff that was put out there was actually good.
Yeah, no, it's something definitely to put some attention to and validate. I guess in some the way some people look at it, something's better than nothing. But underneath the scenes, a lot of those policies are nothing anyway. So
okay, so zooming back out, right? So Office 365 is popular because Microsoft Stack's super popular right now. So we talked about the 3 or 4 or 5 things that everybody should be doing that they're not, right? How important, just out of curiosity, how important do you feel a password is at this point?
I still think passwords are important. You've got regulatory mandates that, depending on whether it's HIPAA or PCI or FISMA or whatever governing body, they mandate and specifically specify that passwords should be X characters. It's got to be changed in X amount of days. That's a hard one to enforce. It always has been. Therefore, you're never going to achieve 100% compliance in that password department. One of the big problems that we see, this is tied to the Office 365, because when you think about, these guys aren't just brute forcing their way in, they're actually stealing and buying credentials off of the dark net, or what we call the deep web. So when you look at somebody like a high profile data breach like Marriott or a Home Depot, a lot of those credentials, those passwords and usernames are now on the black market for sale. Those get sold for pennies on the dollar. And now the bad guys are taking those credentials, attempting to log on to Microsoft 365, hoping that the small business user has the same credentials across all their web apps. So now they're logging into bank accounts, Microsoft 365. This is the problem. And that's why when there is a big high profile data breach, not to dismiss the other size business, it impacts us all as Americans, or pretty much everyone throughout the globe. It impacts every consumer because now our data was leaked and we know that the bad guys are going to get access to those passwords and usernames. Which the real question is that the same credential set that you're now logging on to all your pertinent financial apps, office apps, and every other thing,
So let me ask you this. Obviously, we've all heard probably somewhere along the line that the app on the phone from a MFA or 2FA standpoint is the most secure versus SMS or phone calls. How important or strategic or helpful are the tokens, right? The USB keys like YubiKey and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of extra layers. I'm not one to procrastinate on whether it's multi-factor or two-factor or whether it's single sign-on. Back in the 90s, I was a big advocate of the old RSA Secure ID, which was a little fob, and it gives you a unique number every 60 seconds. I'm still a big fan of those. I think it depends on the actual customer and what their operations are, and can that actually be implemented within their daily operations? Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the customer can work effectively, where security doesn't negate the availability of their systems or interrupt business operations.
Convenience versus security. It's always a balancing act. So you came into this real hot and heavy about the 3 pieces, right? Like Office 365, the endpoint, antivirus. How does that or your firewall, right?
Yeah.
But how do you do that with everybody working from home with their Comcast router or their Verizon modem or whatever, or Linksys device from Best Buy they got?
Yeah, this is So this is another reason that even cyber services is even hotter, because now that you have the new norm, the work from home environment, employees are now asked to go perform their daily operations from their kids' gaming PC, but now they're connecting to corporate resources, with or without a VPN. And basically that's a blind spot and a huge risk, because we've never had any intelligence. We've never audited what this new machine is that you're using from your teenager, which predominantly they're using with gaming, which we know all kinds of nasty stuff that those guys are doing on their machine. And I'm referring to malicious sites and downloading free software and all the other good stuff. But at the end of the day, it's
is it doable? Like, is this a pipe dream, or is it actually doable?
Yeah, it's actually doable, but there has to be it's a vetted process. If you're going to connect to my network and corporate resources, you have to perform A, B, and C. A is maybe you've got to have that RMM agent so you can remotely monitor and control or perform, X operations, at least minimum, having vetted that it's got some type of AV protection. I can tell you right after COVID hit, there was a mad dash just to get employees operational where they can log into their web-based CRM, but had no AV on those systems at all, or outdated or expired AVs, just because they were their children's or whatever the reason was.
I feel like AV kind of went a little bit overrated, right? Like, you've seen all this next gen stuff coming from the mid market, Carbon Black and all this stuff. Like,
sure.
What's your opinion on that? It's not everything's created equal, right?
Yeah, no, and I'm just throwing AV because it's just something that we can relate to. I mean, there is a whole it's almost like a piece of pizza. AV is just one little slice, and we have to be monitoring the connections, the configurations. How about breach monitoring for anything that evades or circumvents AVs? So you've got, there's solutions in this market specifically to address all of those. But at the end of the day, it's a very large opportunity to capitalize on this work from home community.
For sure. Yeah. So, like, what exactly is then the expectation with, all right, you've determined as the MSP, I got way too much going on right now. It's not realistic for me, or maybe even affordable, depending on the size, to assemble their own security team. Okay. Because these guys probably come with a lot of extra weight in terms of background and compliances and education, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going out there, I'm going to shop for a vendor. What is the expectation? Is it just notification? Is it remediation? Is it, hey, they're calling me because there's a code red, the alarm's going off? Like, what is the actual thing that I'm buying here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you the history behind it. So we developed a security platform so the MSP could be converted into that MSSP. That was the original intent. What we learn is the staff and the engineers at the MSP, they're just overwhelmed right now with just traditional IT work, regardless whether it's, phone systems, backups, whatever their current business operation is. They want to get into the security space, but either A, they don't have the skill sets, B, they just don't have room or the dollars to go out and hire those skill sets and put them in place. And rightfully so, it's actually easier to actually partner with a company that focuses primarily on that security aspect. So what we did is we took our technology and actually built our own SOC here in Dallas, staffed it with our own security DNA. That way the opportunity is back on the MSP. You just want to, buy a platform and the tool set so you can incorporate that with your own process. And maybe you do have a security team, which, you and I both know that number is very small. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the greater opportunity, it was like, we've got to build a SOC-as-a-Service and partner with these MSPs to where we're really going to be an extension to their existing team, but be able to afford it and deploy it and make it all practical.
So give me an example.
Yeah.
And I'm George Co, right? I signed
Yeah.
up as a partner, and I put your stuff. I'll ask you what that is in a second, to
Yeah.
make sure you can see my customer.
Solid stuff.
And an event happens.
Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah.
What do
So
you?
we find there's many different types of threats. We detect that threat. We fire that's been now escalated to what we call an incident ticket. Most of our customers, an incident ticket is going to be communicated to your PSA system. In addition to that, what happens is we include what's called the remedy. And inside the remedy is a description of how to fix that specific threat. Now, keep in mind, these are a smaller volume versus the voluptuous volume of detected events. So incident tickets are going to be smaller in detail for most organizations. So we provide the technical description, which could be making a DNS configuration, a registry key modification, uninstalling software, whatever it may be. Here recently, we also released our remediation button that allows our security team to actually click the remediation and apply that fix to eliminate the threat. Next to that remedy button is what we call an isolation feature. Depending on the severity of the threat, if it's critical, so let's say I see an inbound RDP connection from China and they've dropped this BB script on a box. It's not really malicious yet, but we definitely know what they're in process of is they're trying to establish persistence and a communication which is eventually going to evolve into ransomware after 3 or 4 more stages. So we can actually terminate that RDP connection and also remove the BB script that was actually dropped on that box, which is commonly not going to be detected by an antivirus vendor because they're not monitoring RDP connections, nor are they monitoring a BB script that's benign, which means not known or not malicious because it's not doing anything yet. But we see temp files, BB scripts, PowerShell scripts, all these things that go unnoticed literally by the hour. But it's not to really be negative towards an AV. It's not really their job to go and detect all of those things. Thus, the evolution of the security stack of being able to fulfill those different layers to be able to combat digital crime.
Okay, so the antivirus isn't going to cover it. Windows Defender, surely isn't going to do it. The firewall UTM with everything turned on, I assume that's not going to do it. Why?
Well, that's we've actually seen there's been a big cost savings right now from the end user customer trickling down to the MSP, and they're trying to figure out how can I start saving money. When you look at the UTM box, and I'm just going to pick on a few vendors on maybe like a credit union type business that might be 100 to 250 end users. Sometimes those UTM boxes run anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 or even greater $1,000 a year. Well, let's look at this. I've got 10 employees now at the physical office being protected by that UTM, and my other 200 employees are all working from home. What kind of value am I getting from that UTM? And by the way, this is actually a real live situation that's occurring in conversations that are coming up every day. And at the end of the day, they're spending a lot of money just on managing and monitoring that UTM component, not just the actual subscription costs that they're paying Fortinet, Cisco, and all the other number of vendors. So once again, you have to evaluate the current situation of the work environment. Are people going to be working remote? Are they on that physical network where the UTM is actually justifying its existence and cost? So I kind of answered in a roundabout way. But secondly is, in a perfect world where people were in the office and they were actually monitoring all of that, yet again, I get back to the question of, great, you've got that expensive UTM device, but who's managing and monitoring it?
So okay. If it's not realistic to put UTMs at everybody's house and the UTM's only going to go so far, then what exactly are the bits and the pieces that enable you and other people that do what you do to actually do what you do. Well, what am I missing? What are you telling these people to install?
Yeah, so we tell people to have a presence on all their endpoints, which allows us to do all of the endpoint monitoring that incorporates probably 11 or 12 pieces of pizza, if you will, if we want to go back to the Domino's analogy. And it includes things like breach detection, next-gen malware monitoring, intrusion detection related things at the protocol level, crypto mining type protection. So you've got all these different threats that are being addressed from our purpose-built apps that we include in our SOC service. As it relates to the network layer, we see a lot of these homes that are using Ubiquiti now, or some smaller, affordable home router with some security features. So therefore, we actually just added support for Ubiquiti, just due to all the home workers that are using that device right now. You can get those devices on Amazon that'll ship, just like the guy ringing my doorbell a few minutes ago. They're, $69 to $100. So, it's cheaper than a case of beer these days.
So is it not realistic then, I don't think so, but I'm going to ask anyway, to have monitoring from your residential like Ubiquiti's like kind of quasi business, kind of on the lower end, but like, what about the stuff that's already there? Like, is it realistic for that stuff's going to be monitored?
Yeah, in some scenarios it won't. So when you look at the Verizon Fios home networks, we see a lot of those default routers in place. We do support those. So you can enable logging. The thing is you have to, we don't require the shipping of an appliance or a virtual image. So we're going to work with you regardless of the infrastructure that's inside there. But think about the time of setup. So what we're trying to avoid is shipping boxes, doing, lengthy deployments. So we leverage our existing agent that's installed on that PC, and we turn that into a firewall log facilitator. So it communicates with the actual edge device, and it serves up the log data to the Rocket Cyber SOC team, so we can have insight and visibility and start monitoring for malicious indicators.
At what point do you pick up the phone and call somebody because there's a problem?
Yeah, so that's also another good question. So the firewall vendors, pretty much all of them, something that's in common is they create their own what's called severity stack, starting at info, debug, all the way up to emergency, critical, and severe. So we have ticket notifications. We also have SMS, and then we also have telephone. So in the instance of the RDP connection from China, you're going to get a phone call, especially if there's dropping payloads on the box. If it's, hey, we see an FTP over to Russia and it's a university and there's nothing else going on, then you're going to get a ticket because we've never seen FTP activity. There's nothing else malicious going on in that box other than a file transfer connection. So you have different layers of severities that could prompt a telephone versus just a normal email or PSA ticket.
Okay. So flipping to the other side, right? We've just gone through what's happening out there. What are the things people aren't doing? Why, the existing technology is just not stepping up because it's, the industry's kind of evolved. From one of the struggles that MSPs have, and we mentioned it earlier in this call, is getting existing customers to spend more, right? Especially when it's not a squeaky wheel right now, right? Usually something has to occur, hopefully not severe enough that you lose the customer and have a legal issue, but something usually has to occur in order for them to open up the idea that more money needs to be invested in their technology. Obviously, this is a little bit different because some of these events could be business ending, right? Mm-hmm. The ransomware or whatever. Security events that are popping up. So from a positioning standpoint, how does this conversation help these people out there either get their existing customers to open up their eyes and have that conversation, and or prospect new customers?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to address on that question or bullet point. And, given the...
You can break it down. It's okay.
Yeah,
I know where you're big.
let's break it down a little. So post-COVID, that's given a lot of MSPs opportunities to kind of redefine their marketing efforts, generate new brochures, all that kind of thing. We've seen a big shift on MSPs redefining what we call their core 3 plan offerings. Not that this is going to be applicable across the entire MSP industry, but I hear things like A, B, and C plans, or most
bronze, gold, silver.
bronze, gold, and silver. And what we've seen a big uptick in is their premier plan is going to include a full-blown SOC-as-a-Service. It's going to give you the entire security stack, right? And the guys on the medium plan, they're actually going to give you some security, but they're not going to give you the full thing because they want to have an upgrade path to get you to that, whatever that ultimate plan is. So it's an upsell. So I think those 2 comments are relevant. And then, quite honestly, what's also been a very interesting conversation among MSP owners is, look, regardless of the plan, we're now going to be enforcing cybersecurity monitoring for every one of our customers. And the customers that don't sign up for it, this gives us a great reason to actually fire the customer. Sounds weird to me. It's, but I guess I understand it, because when you look at the actual response, it's like, you really want to fire your customer? And it's like, yeah, if you talk to any MSP, they always have 1 or 2 customers they would love to fire, but they're looking for a legit reason. And so regardless, whatever the reason is, the driving indicator for that is, look, we know that something bad is going to happen to that network. We know that network, and it's only a matter of time before something, whether it's ransomware or what happened or what have you, impact that network. We don't want to be held liable. We know a lawsuit's coming. And in fact, if you think about it, could be historical contracts that they want to migrate away from and use cybersecurity as kind of covering their ass, if you will. So it's a combination of reasons, but people definitely want to avoid litigation and liability.
So let me throw another thing out there. You're talking to people all day long, MSPs. How much more are we talking about from a price increase? Like, what's the averages of the bronze, gold, silver are you seeing? Like, if the middle one is just monitoring and notification, and the top one is the full gusto, like what do you see as the price point now in those 2 scenarios?
Yeah, I'm not a industry analyst to be performing research. I can tell you what I've heard, and I hear lots and lots of numbers. I hear cybersecurity SOCs being resold by the MSP, most commonly ranging from the $16 to $28, being added on to whatever their existing plan is, and that's kind of for that ultimate plan. At the same time, I hear MSPs that incorporate whatever that SOC is to their existing cost, because they're already content, whatever their plan A, B, and C is, and there's plenty of profit in there. But that definitely needs a lot of analysis, but most commonly I'm hearing people between that 16 to 18. And then there's always that group of customers. They tend to be like 5 to 10 employees. Like I'm referring to like dentist offices, where they're very penny conscious, if you will.
I call that the micro business.
The micro business. And typically I hear $8 to $12 for those micro business, where they're going in and selling the SOC-as-a-Service. And they're
so just to be clear, so that we're not mincing words, $8 to $12 either per user in addition or per endpoint in addition.
That's another great topic. So because some SOC vendors charge you per user, others charge you per device, others charge you per user and device. Mm-hmm. For Rocket Cyber, what we do is we only charge per device, because, even though, as a manufacturer, you always look at where you can try to get revenue. But I'm a big believer, when you're developing software, is how do you remove sales obstacles?
Yeah.
And whenever you have sales barriers and you add another equation to the mix, you don't want the end user telling the MSP, no, it's too complicated. So we just make it straightforward, charge per device. We actually include all your Microsoft security monitoring for free.
I was literally just about to ask this. So like,
Yeah.
if you have 3 shifts, for example, and there's 10 computers, but 30 employees, how do you handle the additional Office 365 monitoring?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's very common. We actually have several MSPs where that's heavily. So if you think about the hospitality industry, they may
Whenever they get back to business, yeah.
Yeah, we have 7 or 8 office users per computer, at a hotel. And the reason they want to monitor all those users, which we do allow you to view all the threats per user, but we only charge you based on the computer. So it's very nice. So they're only having to pay for the computer license, even though we're performing monitoring for all their users.
Interesting.
That's pretty unique to us, where most vendors don't do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fantastic, honestly. So let me ask you this question. How much reporting visibility do you recommend that MSP should present to their end customers when it comes to this category?
Yeah, it's very, that's a hot topic. And right now, I think there's been, and this goes across the majority of the vendors that provide the SOC. Most of the SOC vendors are not content with their reporting, predominantly because there's been a lot of development for adding missing pieces to the puzzle. Like, for an example, there's certain certain SOC vendors that may not address firewalls, or certain ones that may not address Office 365, and everybody's been focused internally on building up their core security offering and relying upon ticket notification, which obviously MSPs are already familiar with that process. I can speak to you personally from our perspective. We've developed our own reporting, but I'm not happy with the current stage of what I call that quarterly business review that we're all accustomed to. So we've got a big development initiative now that's going to be that, I'll call it an infographic type SOC report that you're going to be getting. So we should be releasing that this summer. And it'll be a monthly or quarterly option. And basically, think about it like this. We detected 100,000 events, 30,000 were investigated and acknowledged, 30 or X amount turned into incidents, and then you had N amount that were actually remediated. And at the end of the day, the owner at the small business cleaner, they don't care about all the technical details. They want something to justify that you're actually monitoring and protecting them and doing something for that fee that you're paying the managed service provider.
Fair enough. I mean, so is there an evolution there has to be an evolution to the security space, right? It doesn't just stop here.
Yeah, no, it's evolving. And I think a lot of it's being shifted to the SOC providers because, as you know, next year in 2021 and in 2022, there's going to be a new threat. There's going to be a new hot security XYZ that's got to focus on that. Ultimately, all of these hot new things and all these emerging threats are going to fall back on the SOC because they're responsible for the entry vehicles to address whatever type of threat it may be. So in my opinion, it's more and more things are going to be shifted to the SOC responsibility in order for the MSP to scale its business, because they're focused on daily IT operations, going out and acquiring new customers, and they've decided to go and partner with a security vendor that is responsible for staying up to date on all these emerging threats and whether a new technology needs to be developed, or maybe they partner with somebody to be able to address that specific attack vector. So
no, it's very interesting. I mean, we kind of went in like 3 different areas on this call. What's your kind of closing thoughts? Best advice for people who are watching this to protect themselves from now until the end of the year?
My best advice is really hone in on how the attackers are going to get inside the network. So when you really think about it, there's 5 technological, you call it the IoT devices, which are the refrigerators and intelligent TVs. Hey, that's a very low probability. So would be very small on my list. Let's take things like the Office 365, which are very heavily populated. Let's take the network telemetry, and obviously let's take the endpoint, really hone in on those 3 attack vectors, put in a place to have what's called continuous cybersecurity monitoring, whether you staff it yourself, build your own technologies, or you go and you partner with a SOC vendor that's dedicated to empower them to deliver security monitoring. But at the end of the day, you can't have blind spots anymore. If you're not monitoring certain areas, the attack's inevitable and it's going to happen, and you're going to lose that customer.
No, I think that's sound advice, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Billy, how do people find you?
You can go to rocketcyber.com. You can also, for email direct, it's Austin, as in the state of Texas, at rocketcyber.com as well. Either one of those will work.
Awesome. I really appreciate you coming online. If anyone actually tried to submit a question, I think the chat was broken, so I apologize. I tried to come up with things that I felt were, important to ask. So sorry about that. Again, MSP initiatives Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we'll have another one this upcoming Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Billy, I really appreciate you again for coming on board and giving us like an hour of your mind space. Yeah. And for everyone that was watching today, hopefully you guys got some good tips. And if you can, ping Billy, with questions, don't hesitate to do so.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You got it. Have a good one.
Take care.